Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time for the next in our monthly sequence of advocacy workshops. Today, we're going to be talking around building long-term relationships with district staff and local electeds. Before we get started, just want to refresh folks on our statements of participation. Essentially, we want to make sure that this is a safe and secure space for everyone to participate. So if you do see any concerning behavior or discrimination or inappropriate language, please flag that for myself or my colleague Tamina. You can directly message us in the chat, just so we can make sure that, again, we keep this as a safe space and we have a zero tolerance policy for any kind of abusive behavior. In terms of what to expect today, we will be saving and sharing the slide deck as well as the webinar recording. We will be sending it out in the next day or so to all webinar attendees. So don't worry, those resources will be coming your way. We do encourage you to please use the Q&A box for any questions you have for our participants. Please do not ask them in the chat. The chat gets overloaded. We won't be able to see them. Please use the Q&A box at any point during today's presentation to let our wonderful panelists know any questions that you have. All right, so if you were part of this webinar, you were likely already registered for our action alerts and our main way of communicating with the field. So those email blasts that you get from our advocacy team, every single month we send out an advocacy bulletin. The next one's going out next week, and that provides highlights from the month and action opportunities. So that gives you like a quick rundown of what's going on the Hill and what is needed from the field. We also put together through those emails the monthly workshops, and the goal here is to build our collective advocacy skills and also engage in some peer-to-peer learning, uplift what's working in the field. And then obviously, of course, we send out those action alerts, the specific targeted actions that we hope you take to make sure that you activate your congressional member on. You're going to be hearing a lot from us pretty soon about the budget season that is coming up and making sure that homelessness is prioritized there. And then finally, they're also through those emails, you'll see opportunities for virtual office hours with our advocacy director, Tamina. So we just want to make sure that we keep this door open so we can have two-way information sharing with all of you. Finally, we do have one more upcoming advocacy workshop. We have on May 28th a session on using economic and public safety arguments with moderate and Republican offices. And then we're going to be deploying a whole suite of additional trainings for the summer and the fall. So we're taking all the feedback that you give us and in reflecting that and incorporating that into our updated trainings. So we are listening to you, and we want to make sure that we can get you the most tangible and most relevant resources as possible. So just keep an eye out for those additional workshops. And then without further ado, we are going to move on to today's discussion, which again is building those long-term relationships with district and member offices. We're joined by the fantastic Tamina Chowdhury from our National Alliance team. She's the Director of Advocacy and Campaign Strategy. We also have Zach Schagel from the Path Los Angeles. He is the Senior Director of Public Policy. So Tamina is going to give a little bit of an overview kind of at a higher level in terms of how the Alliance thinks around this topic, and then Zach's going to give us a really concrete example of what's working in LA. So thank you both so much for your time. And Tamina, I'm going to pass it on to you.
Thank you, Alec. Before we dive in, I would love to get a sense of the room. How many of you regularly engage with your congressional staff, district staff, or local electeds? You can put your answer in the chat. Um, and how many of you feel confident that those relationships are strong and ongoing? Okay, well, let's have that chat going. Next slide, please. Great. So policy change doesn't happen in a vacuum. I'm sure you all know this. It happens through people and relationships. District staff are often the most trusted advisors to members of Congress. They shape what issues get attention and how decisions get made. Local elected officials like your mayors, council members, county leaders also play a powerful role in influencing federal priorities. And most importantly, long-term trust is far more effective than one-time advocacy. When offices know you, trust you, and rely on you, your voices carries much more weight. Next slide, please. So when we talk about relationship building, we're really talking about a whole ecosystem. That includes district directors and legislative aides, especially those covering housing or homelessness. It also includes local elected officials like mayors, city council members, county executives, as well as state legislatures who have strong federal relationships. And don't forget key local stakeholders who already have influence over your member of Congress. You can work alongside with them rather than separately. Next slide, please. So at the center of all of this is one core idea, a trusted resource. That means providing timely and accurate information, not necessarily speculation. It means bringing solutions, not just highlighting problems. It also means being responsive and reliable and staying nonpartisan and mission focused. When staff see you as someone who makes their job easier, they will keep coming back to you. Next slide, please. Every strong relationship starts with a solid foundation. That usually begins with an introductory meeting. That could be virtual or in person. It could be in DC or in district. Use that time to clearly share who you are, what do you do, and why, and why your work impacts locally. Just as important, listen. Learn their priorities and what they're hearing from constituents. And always follow up with a short note and any key resources you promised. Next slide, please. Relationships fade if they're not activated, if they're only activated around risk or ask or firefighting. Instead, aim for consistent engagement, monthly or quarterly check-ins when possible. Share updates like new data, emerging trends, or short stories from the communities. Invite them to events like site visits when they're in recess, even when you're not asking them for something. That consistency is what builds credibility and trust. Next slide, please. The district is where relationships really deepen. Take advantage of recess meetings and invite staff and electeds to visit shelters or housing programs. Host roundtables with service providers and people with lived experience. Community events are also great opportunities for informal connection and visibility. These moments turn abstract policy into real-world impact. Next slide, please. Centering lived experience is critical when talking about homelessness. Data is essential, but stories make it real. Elevate the voices of people most impacted and thoughtfully prepare speakers so they can feel confident and supported. Above all, ensure dignity and respect. These stories are powerful and they shape how decision makers understand the issues. Next one, please. Effective advocacy meets officials where they are. Take the time to understand their political and local context. Frame homelessness in ways that align with their priorities, like it could be an economic issue, a public safety issue, or a public health issue. And whenever possible, connect the issue directly to impacts in their district. That's what resonates most. Next slide, please. Local elected Local elected leaders can be powerful allies. Build coalitions with mayors and other local officials, coordinate messaging, and look for opportunities for joint advocacy, like letters or meeting together in federal offices. Their voices carry a unique credibility, and their influence can help elevate homelessness as a federal priority. Next slide, please. There are also some common pitfalls to watch out for. Avoid only reaching out when there's a crisis or emergency. Be mindful not to overload the staff with too much information at once. Try not to be overly transactional. Always follow up and plan for staff turnover. Relationships need to be rebuilt and maintained over time. Next slide, please. So what does success actually look like? It looks like staff proactively reaching out to you for input. It looks like invitations to briefings, meetings, and discussions. You'll see increased visibility of homelessness issues and ultimately policy wins paired with sustained support over time with your member of Congress. Next one, please. So to put this into practice, here's a simple call to action. Identify 3 to 5 key offices to prioritize. Schedule introductory or follow-up meetings in the next few months, even better if it's weeks. Plan at least one in-district engagement. So it could be site visit or a roundtable. And commit to consistent long-term relationship building. Small, steady actions add up. Next one, please. And you don't have to do all this alone. The Alliance offers advocacy tools, messaging guidance, and data and research to support your work. There's also staff support, workshops, coaching like this one available to help you strengthen these relationships effectively. We're here to partner with you as you build influence and drive change. All right. I think that's the last one. Yes. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Zach.
Thanks, Tamina. Like that was really helpful information. That's really important for all of us that are working on a day-to-day basis with our elected officials. Hi, everyone. My name is Zach Schlegel. I'm the Senior Director of Public Policy at PATH. PATH is based in California. I'm actually here in sunny San Diego. We're a statewide homeless service provider and affordable housing developer. And I can talk through some of the work that we're doing across the state and the best ways for you to interact with your elected officials. Feel free to switch to the next slide. Just a little bit about myself. I've been at PATH for a little over 6 years now. Prior to that, I ran the public policy program at an academic medical center here in San Diego. I also, I know Tamina was talking about district staff. I was a district level staffer for a member of Congress for 3 years, also in the San Diego region. I've been active in public health and diversity efforts, and as you can see, all of my various board activities. And also, my other full-time position is being a dad to my 2 kids. My daughter just had her 10th birthday. It's kind of mind-blowing that I now have 2 kids that are over a decade old. Try not to let that soak in too much. Feel free to go to the next slide. Oh, you can go ahead and do one more. Here are the different ways in which you can advocate. Usually these are like more of an interactive activity. It's hard when I can't even see you, but I know that you're all out there. So these are the different ways in which you can advocate. You can call your elected officials, which, believe it or not, is still a very effective way to reach your elected officials. They actually tabulate on any given issue, whether it's immigration, housing, homelessness. If someone calls for or against the bill, they're actively tracking that, probably on a piece of paper, believe it or not. And they're actually trying to see like how many people in their district are supportive of a certain policy or how many people are calling and opposing. So you may think it's an outdated technology by picking up the phone, but it actually is something that they actually pay a lot of attention to. So I strongly recommend if you're able to get on the phone, call your elected officials. You also could do phone and text banking. You could do postcards, reaching out to them in different ways, like even like giving a short sense of your maybe your lived experience, or if you're working in the homelessness sector, if you want to do something in a very short format, like a postcard, that could be effective. Also, canvassing is basically like knocking doors, doing fundraising. We're going to talk a little bit more about public comment later. That usually happens more at the local level, at the city and county, or even at the state level, just going in and doing a very short public comment, and also or doing a longer like testimony. Usually that happens at the state level or even at the federal level if you're called in to testify. Um, that you can use social media to get your message out. Depends on, there's so many different platforms nowadays, but and I don't know which one is like of the moment right now, but I encourage you to think about using your social media channels to get your message out and to advocate. And then doing press conferences, grand openings, things like that. And then more traditional like protests or sit-ins where necessary. I can go ahead and skip to the next slide. So here's the things that you should do when you are meeting with an elected official. They all seem kind of obvious, but believe it or not, I've been in a lot of meetings that went sideways because people didn't follow these very simple rules. But you should thank the elected official, depending, no matter how the meeting went, and just for giving grace for them taking the time to talk because they have a busy schedule. They're doing 100 things a day. You need to make introductions and share your story. One word of advice I have for the folks with lived experience is to maybe think in advance about how you want to share your story and maybe like make a canned sort of maybe like a 2 to 3 minute sort of overview of the situation. Because I've seen meetings where a person with lived experience goes into all the details and it's just a limited amount of time in the meeting. And those details are so visceral to the person that experienced them, but it's just hard when you have such a limited amount of time and you need to get as quickly as you can to your ask. So I encourage folks that are sharing a story to really think about to think in advance about how they want to share that story. So I encourage you to like think of summarizing in a quick burst rather than trying to get to all the details. If they want more details, they'll ask you and you can have a follow-up meeting. But I think like getting straight to the point is really critical. Also, when you're meeting with elected officials, you got to clearly outline what you're asking for. And then, even more importantly, is to know who you're talking to. You got to know, like, is this a federal official, state, local? What is their role? What can they do? What do they have jurisdiction over? Because if you go to the state level person, they may not have the same oversight that a federal level person might, and they might get frustrated if you're talking to the wrong person. So make sure you're in the right place, that you know what sort of power that the elected official you're speaking with or the staffer, that make sure you understand what they can and can't do. I always make sure to offer assistance at the end of a meeting and just say like, hey, how can we help you? Because there's a lot of time you're asking for things, you want X amount of dollars, you want help with a certain program, or you want to support or kill a bill. You're asking. So I think it's important to offer something when you're in the meeting and say, hey, what do you need? What's happening right now? What are you working on? And that always seems to go a long way. If they need something, they'll be sure to ask you because sometimes there may be a bill that they're working on. They might need technical assistance on something. It's important to bring a fact sheet if you have one. I strongly recommend just a one page front and back, no more than that. I know when I was a staffer, if it was larger than one page, I usually didn't actually spend a lot of time looking at it because it was a little overwhelming because you have, X number of meetings in a day. So I always encourage you to have a very simple fact sheet, maybe with some charts on it, so it's like easy to read, and avoid giving like a big binder or something, because that used to happen to me all the time, and those went into the recycle bin on many different occasions. After you have your meeting, I encourage you to take a picture, post it on social media, thank the elected official for taking the time on social, and give them a little bit of love. And then also, following up with a card or email again seems pretty antiquated, but if you have the time to actually handwrite something, that will be really meaningful, and they will hold on to that for a while because you took the time to actually send something that's more personalized. It's really hard. I know we all have a million things going on every day, but if you have the time, I strongly encourage that. I think it's very impactful. Feel free to switch to the next slide. And then what should you not do in these meetings? Again, these seem obvious, seen them. So don't physically or verbally attack your representatives. There's no value in getting into a verbal altercation with an elected official or a staffer. If sometimes things go south and you don't agree on a policy, you just can kind of agree to disagree is, I think, the best way to neutralize these conversations. The one thing that I think is the most critical piece of information I could share with you is don't ever assume that the elected official knows why you are there, who you are, or what you're talking about. Most of these elected officials are coming from a meeting on a different topic. They might have come from a briefing on immigration or environmental issues, and they came in and they're like, "What are we talking about?" They don't have as clear of a grip on their schedule as you might think they do. They have a lot of staff, but sometimes they're just stumbling from one meeting to the next. So they might come in and go, "What are we talking? Who are you guys? Oh, you're housing. Oh, you're homelessness. Okay." And you just need to make sure that you're kind of like level setting when you get into these conversations. And I know it seems like a bit of a waste of time to like have to reintroduce yourself, but I think it's important to make sure that they know why you're there, and then you're kind of setting the stage for a successful meeting. One that I see all the time in our sector, and I came for healthcare, and we had like a zillion acronyms. I see it even worse here in housing and homelessness sector is the use of jargon or acronyms. I mean, most elected officials and staffers, they don't know what interim housing is. Shelter is something that's more accessible to them, but we say interim, and they're like, what does that mean? PSH. There's like a zillion of them that I hear all the time, and it's really critical. Like COC, I'm like thinking of them as I'm talking. They don't know what these things are. So you have to explain it to them, and I think we all kind of, as a shorthand of all the conversations that we're having on a day-to-day basis, it comes easy to all of us. But these elected officials, like I said, they are working on different issues all the time. So I encourage you to try to use the longer version and explain what those things are. It's kind of similar. Don't overwhelm them with information. Don't ever offer any money or make threats. I know they have campaigns going, but you are not allowed to ask for money while you are physically in their office, and they cannot ask you for money while you are in their office. So make sure you keep that in a different location, and don't make any threats, obviously. And then make sure you thank them before you leave the room, no matter how the meeting goes. Feel free to skip to the next one. So I know the last year plus has been challenging, and we're trying to still kind of rethink how we are interacting with not just the Trump administration, but all of our federal level elected officials. And it's been a very dynamic time. I know myself, I'm trying to get my bearings, trying to figure out like what's the best way to approach these issues. I have to like remind myself and the leadership of my organization, fellow advocates, that we've actually been really successful in pushing back against the current administration. We have to, like, when we think that there's a policy that is not going to work or is mean-spirited, whatever it may be, we need to make sure that our congressional representatives know that. We need to be vocal. We need to be active. It's so critical if you're able to get to Washington, D.C., or if you can meet with your congressional representatives in your district office. You need to share data because they really, especially Republicans, really respond to data. Any success stories? I mean, they want to hear about a particular person that might have been housed. If you have a veteran that can go far with Republican offices, or a senior that you've helped, or that is in need of help. I think we just have to have very clear messaging. We had to set the stakes. I hear over and over again, they want to know, like, what would these cuts mean for you if they happen? How many people would lose their housing? Like, what is the true impact is what we need to be sharing. So be like really granular and clear. And like I said, I think those success stories are really, really helpful right now. So encourage you to share, encourage you to push back. We can do it in a very respectful way. We can just push back. Like I said, just bring your data with you, be prepared. If you work or live in a conservative district, it's really important for you in particular to get out there and speak to your representatives and share your voice, especially in those rural areas. You need to tell your friends and neighbors about the work that you do. I know this happens to me. I'll be at the dentist office or whatever, and people are like, "What do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I work in homelessness," because I'm afraid of how the conversation may go. But we all need to like be better about speaking up for the good work that we're all doing, and like trying to demystify it, because I find that most people just have very incorrect assumptions about homelessness and about the progress that we've made. So I think it's really important for us all to speak up. I keep advocating for more speakers bureau type things where we're getting out in the public and like sharing stories about the work that we're doing, because it's not getting out there and the media doesn't cover it in a way that helps us. So I encourage you to all be very vocal and share your stories. Feel free to switch to the next slide. I mentioned I was going to come back talking about public comment. This usually happens at the local and state level. The rules are always a little different. I've a lot of times what happens is they tell you, oh, you've got 3 minutes for public comment, and then you get there, and then you realize, oh, there's so many people here. I'm sorry, we're going to have to limit your public comment to 1 minute. So I've kind of have the rule now of I write all of my public comments for just 1 minute, and if it happens to be longer, then great. I could talk a little slower and enunciate a little better. But usually, at least here in California, the meetings get shortened and we end up with just about a minute. So I know that seems like not a lot of time, but actually you can convey quite a bit in a minute. You just have to talk pretty fast. But I always like draft them in advance and read through and time them to make sure that I'm kind of meeting that 1 minute threshold. So I encourage you to do that as well. And then just in terms of like the nuts and bolts of a public comment, we begin by thanking the group. I'd like to thank the County Board of Supervisors for, hearing this item or whatever it may be, Mayor so and so. Um, you want to make sure they utilize their appropriate titles. Again, knowing like where you're at, if it's the county, their supervisors, city council members, yada, yada, yada. But you want to summarize the issue as briefly as you can, especially with that 1 minute time frame, and then why you care about that issue, why you're there. Try to sneak in a data point if you can, maybe two if you've got more time. It's always helpful if you can reference like anyone that's part of your coalition. Again, it's you got a very limited amount of time, so if you're able to get that in, that's great. And then I always recommend ending with a clear, direct ask. We want you to support X policy, HR, whatever the number may be, followed by a thank you. And then do not go over time. But I also think, at the state level, the rules are very different. I know in California during the pandemic, the state was allowing us to actually call in and do public comment. And unfortunately, that has changed for California. Now you have to physically be there, which is ridiculous because all the people in LA and San Diego and elsewhere, it's challenging for them to get up to Sacramento for 1 day to do, 1 minute of public comment. So it's kind of ridiculous. But if you're able to physically go and do public comment, if a telephone comment is not available, highly recommend that to go in, and that time is valuable for them to see you and that you're there, you're making the case for whatever it may be. But encourage you to do public comment when and where you can. Feel free to flip to the next slide there. And there's my contact information. Happy to also I think I have time for questions here momentarily, but I encourage all of you to reach out to your elected officials. Hopefully, this information was helpful. You have my contact information. I'd be happy to talk more directly if you have other questions. I'm going to kick it back to Alec and Tamina. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Zach and Tamina. That was wonderful. Really appreciate all the insights. Getting some good engagement in the chat and some wonderful questions lined up. So we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So the first one that I want to ask the group is a little bit specific. So we got a question from Alan here about something that's Detroit specific. The question is, how do we navigate the fact that the city is still under the authority of the Financial Review Commission because of the previous bankruptcy affecting city level financial decisions? I know this was the case in DC too, before DC got home rule back. So I think maybe if we can broaden the question a little bit, how do you kind of influence decision makers when they're not necessarily in elected roles and they might respond to different pressures? So do you have any kind of tactics or examples of how to, influence different commissions or any other different bodies that you might want to treat those folks a little differently than you might a traditional elected official?
Zach, do you want to get that? That's very specific to a city.
Yeah, I can't speak specifically to Detroit, but I would say that I don't know. I tend to treat like all of the, if it may be like a water board or some other local elected official, school board members, or even like folks that are like key leaders in the community, I tend to treat them all the same. I try to treat them like a VIP, and also, like I said, don't assume that they know anything, even though they might hold an influential position or, they might know everybody. I just try to make sure to give them as much like clear information as I can and try to like follow up in a timely way. I know it's not like earth-shattering advice, but like I don't know. I find it's like trying to be like really frank with people, especially on this issue. Like, like I said, so many people have wrong information about homelessness. I like try to make sure I give them really concrete, specific examples.
And I can add something very quickly is that, you know, it's very useful to think about public offices at strategic touch points. So whether that's at local level, state level, or federal level, they kind of connect with each other. They're, as I was saying, they're part of an ecosystem. So not differentiating city from a county, etc., is very helpful, and kind of understand how these are all cogs in the same machine and how they all connect each other. So just thinking about them as strategically is, I think, very helpful.
And then I think the last thing I'll just quickly add is Tamina talks a lot about this concept called power mapping, where you kind of identify who are the different actors in your community, who holds power, who's aligned with you. And I think using strategies like that can help you identify who are the allies who, even if you don't have access to those commissioners or those kind of like unaccountable, not elected officials, trying to identify like who holds those relationships and where there is power to pressure the system and then be able to engage with them to kind of act as proxies on your behalf. Now let's go back to some questions. We got a great one from Katie, and that is, where do you see local advocacy efforts fall short most often when you're trying to influence state level policy? So kind of what are some like, common pitfalls there? What are some strategies to make sure that the local advocacy efforts are aligning well with trying to influence state policy and are effective?
I've actually seen the opposite. I was trying to think of a time where it wasn't effective. I actually find that when our local delegations are interacting with the state level folks, it actually is very well received. We recently convened a group of elected officials and other kind of stakeholders for a trip to Sacramento, which is California state capital. We met with all the state leaders when we had like mayors and council members and other kind of key decision makers that came with us. And I think that really went a long way. In California, we have a particular pot of funding that goes to cities and counties at when the state level electeds hear from the locals about how valuable it is. Like those have been some of our most effective advocates. So I'm actually like in the camp. I haven't really seen it go wrong. I'm sure it probably does in certain places. And again, it's hard thinking about it from a California perspective since the rest of the nations can be so different. But I always see it as an asset.
The next question is a little bit more specific. We got a question from Katie around where can we find economic data that makes the case that funding our services has a high return on investment? I know something that we always encourage at the Alliance is connecting with your continuum of care. The best data is the most local data. So be able to look at, the system performance measures that communities, regularly update every year in terms of how many people are entering homelessness, how many people are exiting homelessness, how many people are experiencing homelessness for the first time, to try to tell like a broader story about the success that the field is having, kind of working against immeasurable odds, right? Everyone's doing such great life-saving effective work every day trying to like bail out the ship and get people back into housing, but there's so many different stressors from the affordable housing crunch to all these other different system failures, like for example foster care, that's driving all these people into homelessness. So I think there's an element where we can kind of talk around how the interventions themselves are very effective. There is a lot of like national level data and community specific data in other communities that specifically looked at the costs of, incarceration, institutionalization, hospitalization of people versus permanent supportive housing. I think if you want to get more specific community data than that, you want to go to your continuum of care. But Tamina and Zach, do you have any suggestions about kind of this like economic argument that what we are doing is not only effective, it's also efficient in terms of cost?
I was just gonna add, I think what you said, Alec, is correct. Like the COCs typically have really good data and information that you can find. I also wanted to call out my former intern who's gone way beyond that now, Raquel Haradi, who's over at the National Locum Housing Coalition. She released an annual report called The Gap, a shortage of affordable homes. It was came out about a month ago. Her and some of her colleagues there like information from National Locum Housing Coalition, National Alliance. You guys have all kinds of really great data that I use all the time when I was making those public comments or presenting something. I think you can easily find information on your on websites for those organizations. Also, you may have a state level or maybe even a local level group that might have good information. I know we've got the San Diego Housing Federation here. And there's other groups in California that have really helpful information. A lot of times too, like I know like in California, we have like UC Berkeley, UCSF put out a lot of really good studies. So depending on your region and your state, I'm sure like some of the your colleges might be pumping out really helpful information you can rely on there.
I think we cover all the bases. One other source could be your local chamber of commerce, or small business associations. They might have good economic data on based on local economy. So if you want to go very micro level, you might find a set of data on housing and homelessness, and you can cross-check it with the information from those entities, and that could be another way too for you to compare and calculate return on investment.
Thank you, everyone. We're getting some good chatter in the chat as well. I want to highlight something that someone just put in there that reminds me of what Zach was saying earlier about being very specific. Basically, the gist of what they're saying is making sure that you actually are providing like a level of detail that is helpful to the staff or the member. So instead of speaking in generalities like creating more homes, be more specific around like what solutions you're advocating for. So not just relying on acronyms like PSH, but if you actually are looking for 100 more PSH units, like explain what PSH is, identify what the cost is, what the impact of being able to fund those units would look like. So I thought that was helpful. So thank you everyone for sharing some of your wisdom in the chat too. We want to make sure this is a peer-to-peer learning space as well. Okay, so we are moving on to the next question. We've got a question from Jalissa over here. Do you have any resources on how to bring conversations back from common deflection tactics? Because facts don't always seem to help in these cases with reps who have decided they are against our causes. Tamina, I want to tee you up first on this. You've done a lot of work around how to identify and use other credible messengers. Can you talk about how
Yeah.
that specifically could be able to help here?
Yeah, I would say with some offices, data and evidence and studies don't have a lot of traction. For those offices, you can think about people with lived experience. So I would ask for you to think about in-district constituents who have actually suffered from homelessness or other stakeholders like small businesses who will be impacted. So I think it's very important to draw a picture to your member of Congress of the impact of the programs and dollars they are funding and what that will look like when those programs and fundings go away. It doesn't only impact those who are homeless, it actually also impacts small businesses, law enforcement, hospitals, healthcare system. So it impacts the whole community. So bringing that lived experience perspective into that conversation, I think is very important.
Just going to add that not every office is going to be sympathetic to the case that you're making. Sometimes these meetings aren't going to go well. I know when I worked for the hospital, there was one particular member who's still there. I will not name right now, but we tried everything we could. He was actually a donor to a community health center, but he believed that these hospitals and health centers should be funded by private donations and not by the government. So it made these conversations very difficult, but we went in and we met with them anyway. I did find traction one time. I tried literally everything, but the only time I ever had traction with them was I pulled a kind of non-traditional partner. In this case, the head of our Chamber of Commerce, who we had a relationship with. I asked him to call the congressman, and that actually moved him to support a particular bill. So sometimes you got to think a little outside the box, but I don't know, just recently when we were in DC last month, I was realizing a lot of the meetings, it felt like staffers weren't saying a lot. And I was like trying not to take that too personally, but they were like, okay, okay. And they weren't like giving me any tangible feedback. So it was hard to tell how things were landing. But sometimes you just are there to convey your information and they're still processing and they're still like kind of working out the budget or working out on the mechanics of a particular bill. So I try not to take these things too seriously. I try to go, okay, well, maybe that's just the moment that particular office was in at that moment. So I don't know. Just go in and make the case the best that you can. And like I said, sometimes these things go sideways, or sometimes they just don't really care. But you just know that you've made your case and kind of try to leave it at that.
This is a long shot. I just want to add one more thing. Are there donors? This is, donors who support your member of Congress when they run for office is another avenue you can explore. These are all public information. It's harder to do, but I think it's worth looking into districts that are where you're having a tough time making tractions. Yeah.
We got a good comment in the chat about the risk of, for example, AI being like a crutch potentially that staffers might rely on. So I think it just really reinforces the importance of like getting in front of, the district office staff, the member, to like have them put a face to like who's running the programs so they can better understand that, so they aren't having to over index on using AI or any other tool to try to get an understanding of homelessness, because you all are the experts and your members should know that so they can rely on you, as Zach was saying and Tamina were saying, so they come to you proactively whenever they have questions. We got a couple more questions here. So one is coming from Ramona here, who's actually meeting with their state house rep next week, and they have 15 minutes. I know, Zach, you were talking around like having a very narrow window of time to try to fit in as much content as possible. Do you have any like tips or tricks for what they should prioritize in that limited amount of face time with the actual member?
Yeah, that's a good point. I almost talking about public comment, but that applies to the actual meetings themselves too, especially at DC. I know it can be really frustrating, especially like I said, I'm from California. You're flying all the way across the country to go to DC to like go and talk with your elected officials. And then when you go and you get like a 15-minute or maybe less conversation, it can be really frustrating. Also, if you're meeting in the hallway, I've seen people like lose their temper about, oh, I have to meet with this, college kid in the hallway, and like they take it personally. I think I've moved past that now. Been doing this long enough where I think it's just important to have a game plan. So I always try to have like a little huddle beforehand, or maybe if you can, depending on the group. Like if it's your like for me, if it was Path, I would we would convene in advance and we would have like a plan of who was going to talk, what they were going to talk about. I know when I was in DC last month with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, we kind of like huddled in the hallway before we went in and said, okay, here's who's going to talk and what the issue will be. And sometimes that gets blown up when you get in the conversation and the staffer or the elected is not interested in talking about what you want to talk about. But it's good to like just be prepared and make sure that everybody has a voice in the meeting and that you have a sense of how long you're going to have because those meetings go fast. They're usually about 30 minutes, but I've seen some that are like 10 minutes or less. Um, One other thing I wanted to add in here too, kind of in the same vein, is like how important staff are, whether it's federal, state, or local. Like I've seen that happen too, where, leadership gets annoyed that they've traveled to a certain place and they're like, oh, we have to meet with the staffer. Oh God, why isn't the elected? And they take it personally. And I'm like, actually, the staffer is probably more knowledgeable than the elected official on a particular issue. Yeah, they're young, but they have a lot of passion and they have time. They'll do a little bit more research on the issue. They'll do a little bit more follow-up, and they'll probably be the ones working more directly with you. So I encourage you to be patient and like don't take it as a slight. If you have a staffer only meeting, I think a lot of times those can actually go in a better way. So just wanted to tack that on there too.
I guess I would add that rehearse. So you only have 15 minutes. If I were you, I would practice it with a colleague and write down your points, structure your conversation. So there's an intro and then there's your ask. Get to the ask at the very top. And then if you have a person with lived experience who can share share the impact of policies, that would be even better. But I would practice it and make sure that I'm maximizing the 15 minutes that I'm given. And then after 15 minutes, always follow up with an email and more resources so they know that you're going to be around and you can start building a relationship with them.
Perfect. Well, it's always exciting whenever folks can get those actual face-to-face meetings with the members. If not, staff is always a good substitute. They're the ones doing all the work behind the scenes. Now let's kind of pivot to the opposite end of the spectrum, right? What if you can't get a meeting with someone? What if you've invited someone to site visits and the office, the members are unresponsive? Do you have any tips for trying to kind of get that introduction and your foot in the door when you're just kind of seeing a wall in terms of non-responsiveness?
You mean specific to scheduling the meeting?
Yeah, I think this would the question that we got specifically, someone has tried unsuccessfully to invite a member to site visit like 4 times and just like hasn't heard back from the office. So what do you kind of do when it feels like the door has been closed, but you're just trying to get in the door in the first place?
Yeah, that can be really frustrating and challenging. I recently had this happen to me. I will again won't name names, but it was a state level person who was new. We have term limits here in the state of California, so there's like a bunch of new faces, and may not have a relationship. And so I was like struggling to get in. I was like, now they've automated a lot of the scheduling process. So you might be emailing a scheduler. Like yesterday, I emailed a scheduler and it bounced back to me with a form. So I didn't actually get like an actual response from the scheduler as a human being. I just got like, hey, fill out this form. But it's just like if you're kind of hitting the wall, like I encourage you to think creatively about who might know that elected official. That's what I did in the case of this state person that I was trying to reach. I was like, okay, like who do I know that would know her? And I had other people calling staffers and the assembly member in this case herself. So like sometimes you have to get a little creative to like get in there. Maybe also if you're able to physically go into the office, the state and the federal folks typically have a district level scheduler and a capital scheduler. So you could go in and you could try to like talk to the district level person and then see if that might help you get in with the capital person, depending on what your need is. But I don't know, get creative and maybe like I said, physically go there if you're able to.
That kind of all covers it. I'll just add that do research on your member of Congress. Find out where they go to church, if they do, if they're closely associated with the business community or the healthcare industry, whatever that might be, if they support the law enforcement. So you can find out a lot about your member of Congress based on the policies they support and try to dig into those issues to find individuals in districts whom they will have relationship with. So lots of research and follow the policies.
Thank you both. And I'm seeing a good suggestion in the chat here to also like check the listservs of what events that the members are going to be at. Again, let's like assume good intent. Maybe there's really busy, but if you run into them at an event that you know that you're going to be at, you can introduce yourself and then leverage that into something more official, whether or not that's a meeting or a site visit. Um, I've seen a lot of good stuff in the chat. I appreciate everyone kind of swapping insights and answering each other's questions, which is very, very helpful. So thank you so much for that. I'm checking to see if there's any last questions. But while I'm doing that, if you both could maybe just summarize, like if you want people to step away with one thing from this workshop, what would be your top tip?
Tamina, you want to go ahead?
Okay. Um, build relationship with offices of your electeds. It doesn't even have to be the electeds, but offices of your electeds at state, local, and federal level. Relationship, relationship, relationship.
I second that, but I wanted to just like I know I'm repeating myself a little bit here, but I wanted to stress like I think this has been the most effective advocacy that I've seen in my career in the last year or so. I really truly think I know it's been a scary time, frustrating time, but I've seen that when we all are coordinating, we're communicating, we're pushing back, I think I've seen that we've been winning. Fingers crossed here. But I really think that the more you can get in and build those relationships like Tamina was talking about, I think we can be even more successful. But it's weird to think of it as a successful last, whatever it's been, 12, 16 months, whatever it's been. But it has been. I remember when they were releasing that, they were doing the thing about that we're not going to take away funding from nonprofits. That went out one day, and then they had hundreds, if not thousands, of calls to all the congressional offices. I had offices that would never usually talk to me that were taking my call that day, and they were like, "Oh, it was clear that it was a bad idea," and then that policy was dead, like literally the next day. So we all mobilized, and we've done that really effectively. I want to thank the National Alliance has been a great like hub for all of this advocacy. And so, like, I really encourage you to just activate. And again, I'm happy to help if you have questions or you're just trying to get started here. But I think it's like a really fertile time for us to be doing advocacy and sharing our stories, getting out there. So thanks to all the folks with lived experience out there that are able to make the trek to whether it's to DC or your state capital, or even if you're just calling in virtual meeting. Thank you for doing that. It's like really, truly helpful right now.
Thank you. And I love the idea of like ending on a positive note, right? Like this year, not just sugarcoat it, has been exceptionally difficult, but I think as everyone has been saying, like the ray of light has been the way that everyone has been showing up. And just to remind folks like what you're doing every day like has an impact, even though there's a lot of members who might not post about you in your meeting on Twitter. They still might be able to be doing things behind the scenes. We know that, for example, a lot of Republican members They might not publicly come out against something that we might not agree with at HUD, but they still might send a letter behind the scenes to the secretary expressing their concerns. So we always like to say, every target is still a target. We don't want to write everyone off. The asks might change, what they might be able to do might differ, but we really want to invest in every single relationship. And as Tamina always says, everything is so local, so build up from the ground level. We will meet you in the middle, coming down from the top. So thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being so active in the chat. You've been wonderful participants. Please stay in contact with us. We will share the recording and the slides. Tamina and Zach's emails are in the slide deck as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us with anything you need or just to share examples of success. So thank you so much. If you were able to take a really quick survey when we end this Zoom, we really appreciate your feedback. We do look at it to make sure that these sessions are as relevant and helpful to you as possible. So please just take 1 minute, give us a little bit of feedback. Otherwise, we'll see you again in May. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.